She was always the quiet one in the music room. While other students talked loudly, joked around, or tried to show off their skills, she usually sat in the last row with her hands folded on her lap. She didn't like being the center of attention, and she definitely didn't want people staring at her fingers when she played the piano. For some reason, her hands never listened to her when she was in front of others. They froze, shook, or simply pressed the wrong keys. And every time that happened, she felt small. Smaller than she already did. People at school didn't really understand her. Some thought she didn't care about music. Others assumed she just didn't have talent. A few even whispered that she should quit the class because she was wasting time. She heard those comments sometimes. People thought she didn't, but she heard every single word. She just pretended she didn't. Pretending was easier than explaining. Her teacher wasn't unkind, but didn't seem to notice the struggle behind her silence. In class, when everyone took turns playing short pieces for practice, her turn always created a strange stillness. She would place her hands on the piano keys, breathe slowly, and try to remember everything she practiced at home. But the moment she felt everyone's eyes on her, her mind went blank. A simple melody that took her hours to learn suddenly felt impossible. Every second felt like someone was tightening a rope around her chest. One afternoon during rehearsal, she made more mistakes than usual. She pressed a wrong key right at the start, then another, and soon the whole melody collapsed. Someone in the back let out a quiet laugh. Another student whispered something to a friend, and they both tried to hide their smiles. She pretended not to notice, but inside she felt her heart sink. That evening she went home with a heavy feeling. Her walk was slow as she kept replaying the moment in her head, her trembling hands, the wrong notes, the laughter. At home, she didn't talk to anyone. She changed into comfortable clothes, took a small notebook from her drawer, and sat beside the old keyboard her family had bought years ago. It was slightly damaged, a few keys made a strange sound, and sometimes the volume button got stuck. But it was hers. It was the only place where she felt safe enough to try. She closed her eyes and pressed a single key. The sound wasn't perfect, but it calmed her. Slowly, she began playing a melody she had memorized. She didn't use sheet music. She learned by listening over and over again. She didn't know why, but reading notes felt like looking at a foreign language. It confused her. But when she listened, she understood everything, the rise, the fall, the emotion behind each sound. Music made sense only when she felt it, not when she read it. She played for almost 2 hours that night. Sometimes she stopped midway to fix a mistake. Sometimes she repeated the same 3 seconds again and again until her hands remembered them. Her fingers moved differently at home, steady, confident, and full of emotion. There was no pressure here. No whispering, no eyes staring, no fear. Just her and the piano. The next day, when she came to school, her mind was still heavy from yesterday's embarrassment. While sitting in class, she wondered if maybe the other students were right. Maybe she didn't belong in music class. Maybe she should quietly step away and save herself from more humiliation. That thought hurt more than anything else. After school, she stayed in the music room longer than usual. She told the teacher she needed extra practice, though she knew she wouldn't be able to play properly in front of anyone. The teacher nodded and stepped out for a short meeting. She waited until the footsteps faded in the hallway. Then she slowly walked toward the piano. She sat down, placed her fingers on the keys, and took a deep breath. But before she could play, the door creaked open. She jumped slightly. It was the school's janitor, an older man who often cleaned the room after classes. He paused, looked at her, and then quietly went about sweeping the corner without saying anything. She hesitated but kept her hands on the piano. She didn't want to embarrass herself in front of him, too. For a moment she just sat there, unsure. Then, in a tiny voice she wasn't sure he heard, she whispered, "I'll try." She pressed the first key. Her hands were shaky again. The melody came out softer than she wanted, but she kept playing. As she continued, something changed. The janitor stopped sweeping and listened quietly. He didn't speak, didn't move, didn't judge. His silence was different, gentle instead of heavy. When she finished, she looked down, embarrassed that she had played at all. She waited for some comment, maybe advice, or maybe a polite smile, but the janitor simply said, "You play with feeling." Not everyone can do that. She blinked. No one had ever said something like that to her before. He continued sweeping as if he hadn't said anything special, but the words stayed with her the entire evening. She replayed them again and again in her head. You play with feeling. For some reason, it gave her the smallest spark of courage. A week later, the teacher made an announcement in class. The school was organizing a small talent event, and all students in the music program had to participate. A few students cheered. Some rolled their eyes, and a couple looked directly at her with an expression she didn't understand at first. Until she realized it was disbelief. Someone whispered, "She's going to perform?" Another muttered, "This will be interesting." Her stomach tightened. She stared at her desk and felt a wave of panic. She didn't want to go on stage. She didn't want people staring at her. She didn't want to fail publicly in front of the whole school. But at the same time, she didn't want to spend the rest of her life being known as the girl who couldn't play. The teacher handed out forms for performance choices. When she got hers, she froze. Should she write her name? Should she pretend to be sick that day? She didn't know what to do. Later, while leaving the classroom, she bumped into the janitor again. He smiled at her, a simple smile, not forced or fake. For some reason, that smile reminded her of his words. She walked a little slower, thinking deeply. That evening, she sat at her keyboard again. She played a few notes, but her mind was too busy. The thought of the talent event wouldn't leave her alone. She imagined the stage lights, the quiet audience, the students waiting for her to fail. And then suddenly she imagined something else, the moment after. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could surprise them. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove to herself that she had more inside her than fear. She closed her eyes and let her hands gently trace the keys. A soft melody began to form, one she had never played before. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. She kept playing, letting her emotions guide her. Her fingers moved faster, smoother, until the melody filled the small room. For the first time, she thought maybe she could really do it. The next day at school, she quietly walked up to the teacher's desk and handed in her performance form. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The teacher simply nodded. When the students saw her name on the list, they exchanged looks again, but this time she didn't lower her head. She felt nervous, of course, but she also felt something new, determination. Over the next few days, she practiced more than ever. She watched videos to understand how different pianists expressed emotions. She listened to classical pieces, not to copy them exactly, but to learn the feeling behind each one. She slowed down recordings until she could hear every tiny detail. And then she tried to create her own version, one that felt natural to her. Every night, her fingers grew steadier. Her confidence grew quietly, like a small flower trying to push through hard soil. She didn't tell anyone what she was preparing. She wanted her performance to speak for itself, but even with all this practice, fear still visited her. Sometimes while playing, she would suddenly imagine the faces of her classmates and feel her heart race. She would stop, breathe, and remind herself. She wasn't doing this for applause. She wasn't doing it for approval. She was doing it because she loved music, because she understood it in a way she couldn't explain, because she wanted a chance to show who she really was. One evening, while practicing, she heard footsteps behind her again. It was the janitor. He didn't say much, but after listening to her play for a minute, he whispered, "Don't hide what you can do." She didn't respond, but those words stayed with her until the night of the performance. By the end of the week, Part 1 of her journey was clear. She was no longer running from fear. She was quietly preparing to face it. The day of the school talent event arrived faster than she expected. For weeks, she had been practicing every night, trying to make her fingers trust her heart more than her fear. But when she woke up that morning, her stomach felt tight, as if someone had tied a knot inside her. While getting ready for school, she kept thinking about the stage, the audience, the lights, the whispering students, and the possibility of failure. She tried to shake the thoughts away, but they stayed with her like shadows. Still, she didn't back out. She kept reminding herself of all the nights she practiced alone, all the progress she made, and all the feelings she had poured into the melody she created. She wasn't just memorizing a song, she was telling a story through her music. When she reached school, the building was filled with excitement. Students carried costumes, instruments, and props. Some were laughing loudly, some were nervous like her, and some acted as if performing in front of a crowd. Was the easiest thing in the world. She slipped into the music room to warm up her hands. She didn't want to play the full melody before the performance, but she needed to feel the keys under her fingers. She pressed a few notes softly and breathed slowly. Her hands still shook, but not as much as before. A few students walked in and looked at her with raised eyebrows. They whispered to each other again. She didn't have to hear their words to know what they were thinking. She had seen those looks many times, disbelief mixed with amusement. But for the first time, their reactions didn't break her. They bothered her, yes, but they didn't stop her. The teacher entered the room and called everyone to line up. The event was about to start. They all moved to the school hall, where chairs were arranged in neat rows and colorful lights decorated the stage. Parents, teachers, and students filled the room. The sound of chatter echoed all around. She sat with the rest of the performers, her heart beating fast. She watched the stage as the first student performed a dance. The audience clapped loudly. The next student came with a guitar and played a cheerful tune. More applause. Then someone performed a magic trick and the hall filled with laughter. Each performance made her more nervous. Her hands felt cold. She rubbed them together again and again. She even tried to imagine herself back in her small room at home, playing softly without anyone watching. But every now and then she would look at the large audience, and the fear would return. When it was finally her turn, she felt her legs go weak. A student behind her whispered, "Good luck," but not in a kind way. She didn't react. She walked slowly toward the stage, feeling hundreds of eyes turning toward her. She heard some murmurs, but she kept moving until she reached the piano placed right in the center. The stage lights were bright, almost blinding. She sat down on the bench and adjusted it slightly. Her breathing was uneven. For a moment she couldn't remember a single note. Her mind was blank and her heart thumped loudly. It felt like everything she practiced had vanished. She closed her eyes. She tried to block out the audience, the lights, the whispers, and the fear. She thought about the janitor's words, "Don't hide what you can do." She thought about the nights she practiced in silence, the melody she created, and the feeling she poured into it. Then, something shifted inside her. She placed her fingers on the keys and let out a slow exhale. The first note came out soft but steady. Then she pressed the second key, then the third. Her fingers remembered what her mind forgot. The melody began to flow. The moment the audience heard the first line of her playing, the room became strangely quiet. The tone of the piano carried something gentle and emotional. People who were whispering stopped. Students who expected her to fail leaned forward slightly. The teacher raised his eyebrows, surprised. She didn't move her head much. She only focused on the keys. Her fingers glided across them like she was tracing a story she knew by heart. Every note felt like she was speaking without words, all her fear, all her loneliness, all her hope, all her quiet dreams hidden behind her silence. The melody grew stronger. The emotions in her playing deepened. She didn't look up even once. She didn't need to. The music was enough. Slowly, the audience forgot their doubts. They forgot the quiet girl they had seen struggling in class. All they heard was a beautiful, heartfelt performance that felt pure and honest. Each sound filled the hall with warmth, something no one expected from someone who never spoke much. Near the end of the performance, when her melody softened again, the hall was so silent that even her softest note could be heard clearly. It was as if the room was holding its breath, waiting for her to finish. She pressed the final key gently, letting the sound fade naturally into the air. She kept her eyes closed for a moment, unsure of what would happen next. Then she slowly opened her eyes. For a second she thought something was wrong. The whole hall was still silent. Everyone was staring at her. Her heart dropped. Maybe they didn't like it. Maybe they were just too shocked to react. But then, Someone stood up. It was apparent in the back row. Then another person stood. And another. Within seconds, the entire hall rose to their feet, clapping loudly. The sound echoed around her, filling the space. Someone near the front even wiped away tears. The teacher looked stunned. A few students had their mouths open, shocked beyond words. She stared at the audience, unable to believe what was happening. This wasn't polite applause. It was respect. It was admiration. It was recognition. Her hands trembled again, but this time not from fear, from relief, from pride. She had done something she never thought possible. She had shown them her real ability, the one she hid for so long because she was scared of failing. As she stood up from the piano bench, she saw the janitor standing near the side of the hall. He clapped with a small, proud smile. Their eyes met for a moment, and she felt grateful. Not because he praised her earlier, but because he saw her when others didn't. When she walked off the stage, the students who used to whisper behind her now looked at her with a different expression, not judgment, but respect. A few even stepped aside to let her pass, something they never did before. Backstage, the teacher approached her. His voice was soft, almost emotional. He told her that he had no idea she had this kind of depth and expression. He asked her how she learned to play like that. She simply smiled and said she practiced. She didn't explain more. She didn't need to. After the event ended, people came up to her one by one. Some told her she inspired them. Some said her music touched their hearts. Others apologized for underestimating her. It was overwhelming, but in a good way, when she finally stepped outside the school building. The evening breeze felt different, lighter, softer, as if the whole world had shifted a little on her walk home. She replayed the performance in her mind. She remembered the fear she felt at the start. The moment her fingers touched the keys, the silence in the hall, and the standing applause. It all felt unreal, like a dream she never expected to come true. That night, she went straight to her keyboard again. She placed her hands on the keys and began playing the same melody, but slower, letting the emotions settle, this time. She didn't practice because she feared failure. She practiced because she was proud, because she believed in herself now. In just one performance, everything changed. Not the world, not the people around her, but something far more important. The way she saw herself, and from that night on, she never doubted her talent again.